You know, I joked a while back that Sony and Microsoft were in a competition to out-fail each other, but it seems that that's becoming a reality more and more as days go by. With Sony just dropping the ball left and right, their terrible decision-making is sending waves down the gaming industry. People are being laid off, studios are being shut down, DEI is being pushed in various aspects of video games, and the people who end up being hurt the most are the gamers themselves who purchase these products and support these companies. And while some of us knew already that these corporations were bad and that they were ripping the gaming industry apart from the inside, there are a lot of people who don't know, who are curious about it and don't want to be ill-informed when the time comes to make a financial decision. So it's made even more difficult when the corporations that we're skeptical about end up being super shady. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Sony being shady, not just once, not twice, but 3 times. We got this post from Pirate Software. The Helldivers 2 community was tricked by Sony. Sony declared having a PSN account would be mandatory to play Helldivers 2. The community revolted and trashed the game's review score to 13% positive. Sony walked it back and stated they wouldn't be making PSN mandatory. So if you need a recap, Helldivers 2 was not PlayStation Network required for 6 months. So it was an optional thing. You were able to skip it because of a technical difficulty, but they planned on implementing it later but failed to inform people properly about it, and now Arrowhead is suffering, and they're fighting to push back on that against Sony, who are being very, very stubborn about all this. But when 200,000 plus people bombed the review score for Helldivers 2 on Steam, Sony announced that they'd be backing down from their PlayStation Network requirement. One of the big issues that people took with it was the fact that in different countries who were able to purchase the game prior are currently locked out of that, and we're not going to be able to play it in the future once that update came into effect. But guess what? After Sony announced, hey, we're finally going to back down from this and we're not going to trouble you gamers on PC any further, it turns out that the entire time they weren't even telling the truth. They were lying. Well, they were half lying apparently. See, they did remove the PlayStation Network requirement in order to be attached to the game, but they're still locking people from different countries out of it, as it says in this post here. He says, declaring victory, the community undid the massive wave of negative reviews, yet Sony did something sinister in the background. They restricted Helldivers 2 from being purchased in all 177 countries where PSN isn't available. They fooled you, and the devs are still fighting to fix it. So yes, the Arrowhead CEO did confirm that they were still in talks with Sony over this issue, which is ongoing. So this situation is not over. Even I was trying to give gamers a victory in my previous video about this, but of course Sony is going to Sony. Why would any of us be surprised? But he goes on to say, for those claiming these two actions were not associated and trying to community note me, Sony restricted sales at 2200 UTC on May 4th and sent out the notice of walking back to the PSN requirement at 0400 UTC on May 6th. These actions were 30 hours apart. The wave of downvotes started on May 3rd and continued until Sony announced the PSN requirement was dropped on May 6th. You can review this in the package information and via Steam's customer reviews tool. Then he finishes off with Helldivers 2 is now banned for purchase in Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia as of 7 minutes ago. Still trying to say this is Steam's fault. Now this was on May 10th, but in real time, as he was explaining to people what was going on, they blocked even more countries. So they are blocking countries from being able to purchase the Steam version of the game of Helldivers 2. So you can't buy it anymore in other countries. But things do get worse for Sony. If you recall, Sucker Punch came out talking about Ghost of Tsushima, and they told people, hey, we see what's going on with Sony and their backtracking of the PlayStation Network requirements. Just to let you guys know, the single player version of the game will not require a PSN account, but then they say that you will require an account when playing Legends. So the single player game is why most people play Ghost of Tsushima, because it's an amazing single player game and the story is pretty awesome. The Legend is a different type of game mode in itself, and you can co-op with other people and go on missions and fight through waves of different Mongols from that time period in the game. Now, I wouldn't say that Legends is like a primary selling point. I kind of see it as a DLC, but it's a really fun DLC. Now, that's the only thing that PSN is requiring you to do. Now, I don't personally see that as too much of a big deal, but I do understand why people are upset about it, just because Sony has a track record of ruining their goodwill with their consumer base by locking certain content behind PlayStation Network account account requirements, and it's ridiculous because, of course, gamers are going to try and push back on that because we should have all of the content on the day of purchase. We shouldn't have to lock content behind a paywall or behind an account wall, especially when we've already been playing that game for months, aka Helldivers. But yeah, when we take a look at Ghost of Tsushima's countries that it's banned in, there are quite a lot of them. I mean, and by bans, I mean you just can't purchase the game there if you don't have PlayStation Network access. And it's just kind of crazy how so many countries are locked out of this, so many regions. It's just crazy. I don't get why Sony thinks that any of this is a good idea. I mean, they've dropped the ball repeatedly, and I think that maybe Sony up there is losing their minds or something. I'm not sure. But to see them be so proactive in destroying their goodwill with their consumer base with these horrible decisions like trying to censor Stellar Blade, trying to lock a game that people have been playing for 6 months behind a paywall, or just eliminate access to that game in other countries altogether and then lie about it. It's all ridiculous, and it's not like this is the first time that they've lied. They've lied several times. I think amidst all of this drama, I had reported on it in a previous video that I talked about this. Sony went into their frequently asked questions on their PlayStation forums, and they changed the rules on like the day of all those negative reviews coming in. So Sony went in behind the scenes when people weren't looking, and they changed their own policies to reflect that, oh yeah, you do have to have a PlayStation Network account in order to play PlayStation games, but before they had it as an optional feature in that policy. So when people asked that question, that was the answer that they got. So the understanding was a lot different than what they're trying to make it out to be. So yeah, this is not the first time that Sony has been shady, and I expect that they'll be even shadier as time goes on because of course they're mega corpo and they're completely detached from either reality or their customers, or maybe a little bit of both. But I think what we can be confident in is that Square Enix, despite their flaws, are finally starting to see the truth as well. Because if you see the story from VGC, Square Enix confirms US, EU layoffs as part of restructuring. And this is what we were working our way towards in this story. Publishing, IT, and Square Enix's collective indie games label are affected. And it's really such a shame that indie developers are the ones that are being hurt the most in all of this. While these people sit with their pockets filled and they're all super happy that they're moving forward with a reorganization of their company, these people on the bottom rung who are actually trying to be ambitious, creative, and bring something entertaining to people are being completely destroyed by company politics. And I haven't even started to go over all of the diversity, equity, and inclusion that has also helped to destroy gaming. A lot of people think that we're on the verge of a gaming collapse. I'm not sure if I'm 100% on that train yet. I do think that if we keep pushing back and keep talking about it, we can make an effective change. It certainly doesn't help that Square Enix is departing from Sony. I'm sure that's not going to make people feel very good, but I do think that it's important to note that when companies decide that they're not going to be only exclusive to Sony, that's them learning a very hard lesson, and multi-platforming seems to be the solution for this particular problem. Square Enix is set to make an unconfirmed number of layoffs as part of ongoing company restructuring, it told staff in an internal meeting on Monday. So yes, they are laying a ton of people off. Looks like they are doing a bit of reorganization within their company, but then it says here that the layoffs coincided with the publication of the company's quarterly financial results today, in which Square Enix said it plans to rebuild overseas business divisions from the ground up and has begun optimizing costs at its European and American offices via structural reforms. So what does that mean? This is where things get juicy. Earlier today, Square Enix published a new medium-term business plan, which revealed its intention to make its AAA games multi-platform going forward. So they're going to other platforms. The plan, which the publisher had dubbed Square Enix Reboots and Awakens, I guess it had its own title, lays out a 3-year strategy which it hopes will lead to long-term growth. So they don't believe in that long-term growth with Sony apparently. Square Enix's latest financial results indicated that profits were down nearly 70%. Now it makes sense. It makes completely perfect sense why they decided that Sony was a bad bet. They're not making money with Sony. They're losing money, in fact. They're losing too much money, so now they have to search for other options. Sony can't be relied upon because Sony's losing money now too because of their silly decisions, either with Helldivers or elsewhere. But it goes on to say $141 million in losses on disposal of content at an extraordinary loss. That is insane stuff. These people have lost so much money, and Square Enix, who have been with Sony for so long, are now like, yep, see ya. We got to make money. We got to be able to put food on the table, or else this company's going to go under. But it says that going forward, it will aggressively pursue a multi-platform strategy that includes Nintendo platforms, PlayStation, Xbox, and PCs. By doing this, it will be able to build an environment where more customers can enjoy our titles in regards to major franchises and AAA titles, including catalog titles, it said. And that's something that I actually agree with. You know, it used to be that console wars used to be a lot of fun, but ultimately, as a business model, exclusives really don't work. And with these companies already dealing with financial turmoil, making a game exclusive is just going to hurt your sales. That's probably why Japan saw such a huge financial hit with people not buying the exclusive Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because they weren't selling it to different platforms. Now, of course, their other options might not be that good, but maybe having your game on other platforms would make more people want to play it and would make more people talk about it, of course. So it is something to consider, and I think that it is something that is effective. What they're doing right now with live service and mobile games, PlayStation Network requirements, and all that nonsense, it's not working out. And there is proof that it is not working out. It means they took a look at their quarterly financial results and they were like, no, this is terrible. Get Hector on the phone. We have to make changes. So they're like, okay, well, maybe Japan and South Korea have the right idea. Let's refocus some of our efforts and resources towards that demographic and try to market out some actually fun games in the midst of all of these layoffs, which absolutely suck, by the way. And I do feel for all those people who were caught in that crossfire. But it goes on to say that Kiryu, who was appointed as the Final Fantasy firm's new boss in June 2023, has been enacting a large-scale reorganization of Square Enix's development efforts in an effort to reverse recent disappointing sales of its biggest games. So when it sees the financial trouble that Sony has been dealing with PlayStation Network cancellations, Stellar Blade cancellations, censorship issues, refunds, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, of course, which was probably the biggest hit that they took to their company, with it not selling very well in Japan. And that's likely one of the biggest factors in all of this, is that they want to sell to a market that will actually buy their game. They want to refocus their efforts on Japan to make up for that mistake. Problem is that Sony is trying to make up for that mistake on their own in different ways by trying to restructure and change prices and require PlayStation accounts on certain games where an established community is just not going to have it at all. They're fighting against it every single day. But it does say that in Japan, Square Enix recently promoted a new group of creators to its executive officers and placed checks on producers' influence over individual projects, according to Bloomberg. So they're already in the process of trying to speak to that demographic again and get their goodwill back. They want this game to sell well. They do not want to have another Final Fantasy Rebirth in Japan. They want success. And they clearly do not see success with Sony, who has been shady at best, maliciously deceitful at worst. And it really does lean in that direction with their actions behind the scenes. And not many people know about this unless you dig in and find it for yourself and report it out to people. I mean, this is kind of ridiculous. How many times have they gotten away with this kind of thing and people haven't even batted an eye, or they were completely ignorant to that fact? Not that it's their fault, of course, because this stuff is really starting to explode recently now that people are paying more attention. But it's just crazy to see that Sony and Square Enix, who have been basically two peas in a pod since I can remember. I mean, ever since I was a young child, this stuff was going on. You would see Square Enix and you're like, oh yeah, that's a Sony thing. You see Final Fantasy, you're like, oh, that's Sony/Square Enix, you know? And of course, when the gaming industry is in flames, we get some of the worst scenarios possible, like Square Enix. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to separate completely away from Sony, of course. Just to clarify, they're not. No, what they're doing is they're considering selling to different platforms. That means Nintendo Switch, that means Xbox. They don't have complete faith in making sales if they stick solely to Sony, and that does speak volumes to the effectiveness that Sony has in the gaming market right now. They can't overcome this kind of issue, and Square Enix is already considering other options, even though those other options aren't very good if you look at the grand scope of what's happening with Microsoft, which is also in flames. Nintendo, maybe not so much, but there are issues arising in that part of the industry that need to be addressed at one point or another. And again, they don't want to have another financial flop on their hands, because if they do, they're probably going to have worse results than they have right now. As you can see right behind me, there's a huge dip in their stocks that has occurred over the last few days. Back on the 6th, it was sitting at $84 a share. And right now, all the way down back to $76. And it's just been dropping dramatically. And I guarantee that when Square Enix saw these stocks drop and they also saw the quarterly internals that they discussed, they were thinking Sony is a bad bet. And that is something that not only developers have started to notice, but gamers have been aware of for quite some time and have been trying to talk about. And it's unfortunate that it has taken this long for this kind of conversation to reach the mainstream. But it is fortunate that we are at this point, because that means that more people that need to know are starting to. And that is part of the fight that we want to amplify. But how many branches does this fight have? If you see this Park Place article right here, Ghost of Tsushima developer confirms PlayStation Network linking required to play multiplayer mode for Director's Cut on PC. Now, when I read down, I found this part that I wanted to share with you all, because I feel like this is a solution that could have been brought to the table with Helldivers too, but they didn't pursue it, and yet Sucker Punch is thinking about it and trying to implement it. It says the game is offering in-game rewards if players do link a PlayStation Network to their Steam accounts. They include Archery's Master Attire and Charm of Canine Recruitment. So I think that that would have been a great idea for Helldivers too. Hey, you don't have to have a PlayStation Network account, but if you do sign up for one, you'll get these in-game bonus rewards. And I feel like that's something that you could easily do, you know, re-render some meshes, I don't know, just color some armor differently. You could easily put something in there to incentivize players to do something like that, instead of making it a requirement where people will be completely locked out of it forever and ever and never be able to play a video game again. I mean, that's just an absurd way to go about things. And that's something that this mega corporation, which apparently is supposed to be chock full of video game and business experts, happens to be one of the most incompetently run companies in the world. And gamers are starting to see proof of that unfold before their very eyes every single day. But how worse is this situation going to get? I tried to look into it. With their steady decline in their Helldivers 2 player base, that will probably get worse the longer Sony delays in following through with their promises. I can't even believe that we have to make these companies follow through on their promises that they made when they're supposed to be the multi-billionaire corporation that are handling all of these things. I mean, how is it that gamers are the ones trying to tell these people how to do their own jobs? And this is one of the problems that I think need to be rooted out, either verbally or on paper. I mean, you really need to point this company out, talk about what these people are doing behind the scenes under gamers' very noses, because customers do not like being lied to. I, as a customer, do not like being lied to. And if that's a practice that I am seeing repeatedly on display, someone's going to take action, and these people are going to get in big trouble. You don't mess with gamers and their money. And locking people out of countries, even after making promises that all of it will be okay and you're going to backtrack on all of it, I mean, lying like that? I mean, what is that? Why would I or anybody want to associate with a company that does things like that? Microsoft is another example. What about what they're doing makes people say, oh man, I want to continue my Game Pass subscription? I assume that it would make anybody want to cancel their subscription to Game Pass or cancel their subscription to PlayStation Network when they're closing all of these companies that are bringing on actually fun games, and they're keeping on these companies that don't care. These people that don't care, they get to keep all these jobs, and it's just ridiculous. If this situation does get worse, I imagine it'll be very soon. And once it does, it's going to hit a certain point where people have just had enough, and these companies are going to end up losing a lot of money and most of the players who used to care so deeply about them. And that is all I've got for you guys in this video today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you haven't had the chance to like it and share it with your friends, that would be awesome. And hey, if you're feeling ultra spicy, consider subscribing to my channel so that you're always up to date on what kind of thing I've got going on. I look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Later. Meow meow.